Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is November 9th, 2018. Greetings from Cambridge, Massachusetts. This week's guest is Michael C. Grumley, a former information technology guy whose bucket list included writing and publishing a book. His breakthrough series, a blend of science fiction, adventure, romance, some other genres, features two very smart dolphins named Sally and Dirk, and it has been so successful that Michael is now able to work full-time as an author.
Honestly, without Amazon and Kindle, no one ever would have read this book. I don't think it ever would have made it onto the desk of anybody.
Also this week, I will tell you about my test of the all-new Kindle Paperwhite's waterproof capability in the chilly Atlantic Ocean, and we will check in with the latest from Q2, or maybe it's Q2 and Q3, Amazon's new headquarters. First up in news is the rising rumble of rumors and stories based on people familiar with the matter about Amazon's HQ2 decision, which has been promised within 52 days. That's how long it is till the end of the year. The Wall Street Journal reported that the company is actually planning to divide HQ2 into two equally sized smaller locations. The top three candidates appear to be Northern Virginia, New York, and Dallas. There have been a good number of stories criticizing the assumed decision. That seems a tad premature to me. I think there's going to be plenty of time to weigh in on the choice once it's actually announced. I would get a kick out of it if these leaked stories turned out to be incorrect and Jeff Bezos' intuitive decision at the last minute is a shocker like Pittsburgh or maybe Newark or maybe both. People criticizing these leaked stories have called it kind of a bait and switch or an Amazon con that they promised to do a headquarters with 50,000 new jobs, and now they're saying they're going to do just two smaller ones, and they get all these cities excited about it. I have a feeling that if Amazon had said, we're going to be awarding two cities office headquarters that have 25,000 jobs in each, they would have been able to generate quite a bit of interest as well. And the other thing which is evident from the Wall Street Journal article is the idea that over the period of time, over a year since Amazon started this initiative, that their thinking on what is the best configuration for the headquarters has evolved. That wouldn't be a surprise. And also the labor market has tightened, so that the source of the Wall Street Journal is saying that one of the big factors is that if they have two very large offices, then they can draw on two different labor markets. And obviously one of the biggest aspects of the right place to locate these facilities is, can they attract the technical and software and engineering and development talent that they need for future growth. The period of speculation is going to be over soon, I'm quite sure, and then we're really going to have something to talk about. Amazon did officially announce something this week, namely that free shipping will be available starting November 5th with no minimum purchased on orders that will arrive in time for the Christmas holiday. I imagine that most of you listening to this podcast are Prime members, as I am, so this news is not that big a deal for us, but it does show Amazon taking a proactive stance against Walmart, other competitors moving into the holiday season. Finally, in news, the new Kindle Paperwhite began arriving this week. If you pre-ordered it, you've probably got yours by now. I received a review copy in addition to the one I purchased myself in time to do a dunk test in the surf on Tuesday while Darlene and I were up in Ocean Park, Maine. You'll find a link to it in the show notes. If you listen carefully, I'm going to play a little clip here where I'm actually wading into the water and holding the Kindle against a small wave that was approaching, and I was in my bare feet, feeling how cold the water was. Darlene was wisely in boots, but they weren't high enough to protect her from the cold water, which dunked into her boots. And you'll hear her gasp as that cold water hit her. She kept the camera steady even in the midst of this adverse circumstances. She did a great job, as always, with the video.
We'll try one more wave. Here it comes. All right, now let's go up and see.
Back in the cottage, I recorded Darlene's observations about the new Paperwhite. I purchased an old Paperwhite here at Best Buy just so that we'd have two for the video. So she was able to actually hold both of them, and I began by asking her the most important question.
You have the existing Paperwhite and the all-new Paperwhite. Is one of them lighter and thinner?
Absolutely. It would be this one. And it's waterproof.
You can really tell the difference of the weight?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's surprising. Sometimes there's not that much difference between a new one and an old one, but in this case, it is significantly lighter.
And thinner, too? Can you feel the thinness?
Oh, no, it is thinner. Yeah, it's quite a bit thinner. Yeah. But the weight is the thing that you notice the most.
Now, how about they have this thing, the bezel, which the new one doesn't have. Does that make a difference?
The flat screen. I don't even notice that. I mean, maybe if you were worried about dusting or something, there's no little edge to gather dust or, but I mean, I suppose it does make it look more modern, but it's not something I really would have even noticed.
And then how does it compare with your older generation Oasis?
Okay, so this is a small Oasis that they only made for a small amount of time. And it is the best, I have to say. But I'm sorry, guys, you can't get it. I don't think it exists anymore. But if it did, I mean, if this one died on me, I would look for a used one. I like it that much. It is so light. It's just like a feather. And, it's got a screen that works for me. Some people are going to want a bigger screen, but I don't know. I really like it.
And it has the physical buttons. You like those?
I do. And yes, it has the buttons, but you also can touch the page. So you can do both, which I find I do both. And, I was trying to think what else about it it has the case that adds more battery to them. And do they still do that? I think they quit doing that, so they must have decided it wasn't a good thing. I really like it. But I tend to plug it in every day or so. Just because I don't ever want to be in a situation where, it doesn't work for me.
So if someone didn't want to spend the extra money for the Oasis, you think the new Paperwhite would be a pretty good bet?
Oh, yeah, this is the one we're talking about. Yes. No, I mean, how much is it?
130 Wi-Fi.
Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, that's not bad. Well, so what did we pay for this one?
It's up over 200, I think.
Oh, it's still worth it. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's good. Yeah, it's definitely better than the old one in terms of weight. I mean, if you have an old one and you really like it, would I upgrade? I probably wouldn't. Yeah. But if you are looking for a new Kindle, this is certainly an option. Now, is the Oasis, how much is the new Oasis?
Can be up over $300 with 3G, so it's at least $100 more.
This is really a good buy then compared to that.
Yeah.
Because the new Oasis is quite large compared to mine.
Yeah. Larger screen.
Larger screen, so it's going to be heavier too. So, I think this is great. And we do know it's waterproof. My boots full of water will attest to that.
Thank you.
So the new Paperwhite is a sleek unit, and deliveries so far are not back ordered. The Wi-Fi only model with special offers costs $130. That's with 8 gigabytes of memory. That's larger than the 4 gigabytes that came with the previous Paperwhite. You might want to pay $30 more if you plan to take advantage of the new Paperwhite's ability to download and play Audible books via Bluetooth. That's another of the improvements over the previous model. That $30 additional cost gets you 32 gigabytes of storage instead of 8 gigabytes. If you opt for the Wi-Fi and 3G model of the Paperwhite, that's handy because you're not always looking for a Wi-Fi connection to download books with. I find that particularly helpful at the airport. That top-of-the-line Paperwhite is $250. It's a lot of e-reader for the money, and if you've waited a few years before upgrading, now's a good time to take a look at the new Paperwhite. Plus, for a limited time, Amazon is throwing in a free 6-month subscription to Kindle Unlimited worth $60. If you already have a subscription to KU, as I do, buying a new Paperwhite will extend your current subscription. So this offer is not just a way to get new people to subscribe to Kindle Unlimited. It extends the subscription if you're already on it. Time now for the interview. Michael C. Grumley had a tech job in the San Francisco area 5 years ago when he self-published the first of 4 thrillers starring a pair of dolphins named Dirk and Sally. Since then, his books have garnered thousands of rave reviews on Amazon, and he now writes full-time. I reached him by Skype on Election Day and began by asking him to read the first few paragraphs of Breakthrough, which is the first title in his series.
Something out there sounded strange. He pressed the headphones in tighter against his ears. Sonar operators were a special breed. Few people could sit in front of a computer screen fighting monotony day after day, listening to the faintest of sounds through lonely ocean waters. But for the few who could, it was surprising how attuned a human sense could become. Eugene Walker would rather be a ping jockey than do any other job in the Navy. Here, he could hear everything. Even on a boring night like this, he knew exactly what surrounded them as they slid silently through the dark waters. What he was listening to tonight was odd, though. He had heard it before, and he'd heard it for some time, but couldn't pin it down. He shifted in his seat and studied the computer screen in front of him, listening to the strange sound picked up by his computer. He played it again, and still couldn't place it. Some jockeys were rumored to be so good that they could identify the current moving through the coral, but not him. They'd spent their entire lives on boats. He couldn't hear currents, though he had identified some natural occurrences that the computers could not. But this one was strange, a steady hum at a very low frequency and just barely within the range of human hearing.
That sets a scene. This is the first book in your Breakthrough series, and how many books are published in that series so far?
There's 4. 4 so far. I'm working on number 5.
And this one was published in, I think about 5 years ago, March of 2013, which means that you probably finished writing it in 2012 or so?
Yeah, I actually, here's the funny thing is, I wrote this more as a bucket list item, right? I'd always wanted to write a book, and so I spent about 6 months writing it. So I think I finished it right in the beginning of 2013, and then I ended up publishing it in March. Of course, I did a lot of things wrong. I mean, being an inexperienced writer, I did a lot of things wrong, so I had to fix a lot of things. But yeah, I had written it right up until probably the point that I published it.
Now, I see that your day job is in IT. I'm curious about how writing a novel got onto your bucket list. What was the context that made it that important? That was something that you wanted to do it before you kicked the bucket.
Right. Well, it's one of those things where, a lot of people have that on their list, right? They always want to write a book, and it was on there for a long time. And believe it or not, I don't know if you are familiar with, this is another kind of funny side note, but there's an application, a game that a lot of people play on the phones. It's called Words with Friends.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
It's like a Scrabble game, right. And so I played that a lot with my sister and my mom. And it got to the point to where, they were running so many games that, I was home in the evenings trying to relax, and I couldn't even keep up. It was my turn, and I finally I had to stop and say, I got to do something more constructive with my time. My girls were young at the time, and so they would go to bed, and so I'd have 3 or 4 hours at night. And so it was really that moment that I'm like, I've got to do something more constructive. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to work on the book.
Yeah.
I'm finally going to sit down. I'm going to work on the book, and that's kind of what prompted me to do it. And I did it, part-time in the evenings, writing for probably 2 or 3 hours every evening for about 6 months. I took a little bit of break in the middle, but yeah, that's kind of how it all came out of a kind of a moment of frustration.
You owe it all to Words with Friends.
Yeah, right, exactly. And to my mom and my sister, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what kind of work do you do in IT? What's your day job like?
I'm lucky enough that the books have been successful now that I've been able to quit my job recently. So, my job was, I had 30 years in the industry, and so I was a manager of a computer networking team for a small to mid-size international public relations firm. So I had managed the team internationally, so I was up early, kind of online late, and I had kind of a very odd schedule, but that's what I'd done for a long time, right up until the moment I jumped.
When you put that in your bucket to write the book, did you actually have as part of it the idea that you might be able to become a full-time writer someday?
Well, I think everybody has that dream. It seems so nice from the outside, all the flexibility and all that kind of thing. But that was the hope, and I think that's probably everybody's hope. But it's a real long shot, and I'll be the first one to admit that there's an awful lot of luck involved in this. Writing the right story at the right time, and kind of capturing people. It's like the movie industry, right? You never know what's going to get people, what's going to stick, and so you're just you put your stuff out there and kind of hope for the best. And luckily, I guess I touched on a subject that a lot of people are kind of excited about.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the subject. Dolphins are involved. What are the other things which readers will be introduced to in this first book in the series?
Well, it's funny because it's kind of a multi-genre book, right? It's not easily pigeonholed into a specific genre. There's action and there's adventure and there's some sci-fi, and then there's some romance and things. But what I wanted to do is, and I think that when you write a story, you want to try and write it in a rounded way, in which a realistically rounded way. So there's a lot of facets involved, right? So I think I'm lucky in the sense that I've got some strong female characters, and I probably attribute that to growing up with a single mom.
Huh.
So I've got some strong female characters that a lot of the females really relate to. I've got a lot of kind of the intrigue and some of the military stuff that men tend to gravitate towards. The dolphins are part of it. There's a little bit of the science fiction part, which is a supercomputer that's used by marine biologists to crack the language barrier of dolphins. And so, what they learn is both exciting and kind of frightening. But there's a lot of components in it, I think, that kind of speak to not just multi-genres, but also a larger demographic of females and males. I think it's pretty well balanced, which is kind of surprising.
You're so single mother, and now your family. You're the only male in your family, it sounds like.
Yes, that's true. To my own dismay, and I only say that because I joke with my girls and my wife, and I'm like, man, it's like they're always against me.
You're always outnumbered.
Yeah, exactly. We even had a couple of cats, and the cats were female too. It's like, holy cow. Yeah, but yeah, I'm the only one, but maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Maybe replicating my genes in the male form is not. Maybe the female version is much better.
Well, now the character Alison Shaw makes her appearance in that first volume of the series. Does she continue through the other four?
She does. She is a major character. In fact, a lot of there's probably 5 or 6 primary characters that continue through the other ones, and then other characters are introduced, and some become primary, and some actually end up leaving the story. But yeah, it's there's probably an equal amount of, at least in the first book, an equal amount of strong female characters and strong male characters that go on.
Yeah, Dirk and Sally are, of course, very appealing characters. Your dolphins, do they swim through the whole series?
They do, and what's interesting is I've gotten a lot of emails from people. I've gotten thousands of emails of people writing to me and telling me how much they love the books, which is it's probably better than anything for an author to get. But what's interesting is I have probably out of all the emails I have received, without a doubt, actually. The Dirk and Sally, the dolphin characters, are people's favorites. So this may be the very first book, to my knowledge, where animal characters are a lot more endearing, or even more endearing, I should say, to readers than the human characters.
They steal the show.
They do. They really, really do.
I love dolphins like anyone else. I remember Flipper. I don't know much about the status of efforts to decode those beautiful clicks and noises they make. And what can you say about how far you followed actual current science into their language versus how much you sort of jumped into science fiction realm and extended where we are for the purpose of a really gripping narrative?
Oh, it's very realistic. This was actually based off of some research being done, and this is probably about 20 years ago. There's also there's a dolphin project that's been going on for a long time. The gal's name escapes me right now, but she's really pretty well known. She did a TED Talk not too long ago. I guess a few years ago, but it was actually based on an article, a research article I'd read many years ago. And the idea, believe it or not, came to me even further back. I was reading, gosh, this must have been 20 or 30 years ago, at least 20 years ago, but I was reading a book by Arthur C. Clarke, very popular science fiction writer.
Yeah.
And at the end of his book, he made a very interesting comment. He said, how could we ever expect to be able to communicate with an alien species someday if we can't even communicate with the second most intelligent species on our own planet?
Wow.
Obviously dolphins. And I thought that was very interesting, and it stuck with me for a very, very long time. And over time, the story kind of culminated in my mind, and I would kind of think, if that happened, how might that actually realistically happen? And then I stumbled upon the article about this young researcher that was working on this, and then I stumbled upon the other project. Now there's a number of projects where they are trying to do it, all using different approaches. There's one in Sweden. I posted on my blog, and I think it came out last year. And they're actually trying to use a supercomputer to break the language barrier. And I'm hoping they got the idea from reading Breakthrough, but...
Well, have those efforts actually gotten as far as the story in the book, where they can actually they have a glossary of terms that they really can exchange with the dolphins, between dolphins and humans yet?
It's a lot more limited. They have actually identified some sounds that they believe mean different things, but it's a lot more primitive in terms of the actual cognitive process and exchange. But the project that's been going on for quite a while, I want to say it's the Dolphin Project or something, but that obviously has been going on for a long time, and so the computer platforms and the processing power that they've been using for a long time is a lot more limited than what is used in the book, and what the Sweden team will now actually end up using. So, they had a big limitation. So I don't know if they've actually now upgraded their systems, but the potential is there. I mean, if anything, the computer system in the book 5 years ago is now even weaker than the systems that could potentially be deployed and used today.
Interesting. One thing I noticed in reading Breakthrough is that your suspense themes, when somebody's trying to get out of a submarine before it's about to fill with water, and it's sort of pages and pages of nearly excruciating suspense of, is the character going to live or die? It appears to be a bit of a specialty of yours to create scenes that are that taut. How does that fit into the overall arc of your writing?
It's interesting that you say that. One thing that a lot of people mention to me in emailing or even reviews that they leave online is that for some reason, I tend to have an ability to really make the reader feel like they're there, that they're actually in the room, or they're there kind of standing next to the characters and stuff. And honestly, I don't really know how that happens. I think it's just kind of the way I see the scene and the way the dialogue flows and my descriptions and things like that. And I think that the suspense comes out of that. Yeah. Right? I also tend to be a little impatient, which probably works in my favor because as growing up as a reader, I was never a big fan of these really, really long chapters that would just have so much detail in them that it almost became, just tiresome.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I'm writing a scene or a chapter, if it gets to a point to where I'm starting to actually sense that it feels boring, I'll move on to the next scene that I think is also kind of interesting. And so I try to limit how much time I spend in a particular scene for fear that it will actually end up getting boring. So that probably helps in terms of the suspense and the ability to move the story along.
Yeah. It's fun when you've got a series selling at Amazon. You can the data's right there. And I noticed a trend. Breakthrough, published in 2013, is currently rated 4.3 out of 5 stars based on 8,100 reviews. And then Leap, the second book, the following year, it goes up to 4.6, and then Catalyst is 4.7. Ripple, the latest book, is 4.8 based on 58 reviews published in December of 2016. How do you explain this nice upward curve you've got in the rankings of your books, where the most recent ones are doing better than the earlier ones?
It's funny that you've noticed that. I don't know how many other people have kind of noticed that. I think there's probably two reasons. One is I think the first book in a series tends to get a lot of people reading it who may not necessarily like the general idea. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have, on average, maybe a lower ranking. The subsequent books are probably going to be a little bit stronger, because now the people that continue reading are the ones that really tend to be taken with the story and the writing and all those things. With that said, though, what's kind of unique with my books that's really kind of a pleasant surprise that I was not expecting is many reviewers and many emailers say, my gosh, these books just get better as they go. Whereas I guess the tendency for sequels is to get a little bit weaker, whether it's books or movies, right? Sometimes the sequels do really well, but once it gets to the third or fourth story, it tends to really kind of fall out. And so it's kind of the opposite with the breakthrough books. I think it's because the story has so much potential, and the things that get tied into it, in this, the system that they actually use. For example, in the first book, to talk to the dolphins, in the second book they turn that around, and they attempt to use that on a young gorilla, a primate, and they find all kinds of other things, and then you kind of get into a deeper levels of the story and deeper levels of the characters, and there's a lot of things that tend to happen. So I think that the story evolves in a more interesting way than I think a lot of other stories might. I think other stories may actually start to dilute over time, but for some reason, people tend to think that the breakthrough stories are getting better and better, and so I think that's the second part of the explanation, was I think that the curve upwards is kind of a reflection of that.
The numbers kind of back that up, because Breakthrough has 8,100 reviews. That might be the first people that were looking at it, and then kind of self-selection. The later books have fewer reviews, lots of reviews. I mean, 2,858 reviews for Ripple. That's great. But I can imagine that is sort of a natural process that a series goes through, and if you're improving the books, then you've also got some benefit of that.
Right. I mean, there's the improving of the craft as well, right? I mean, obviously, you're hoping that you're becoming a better writer as you write. Yeah. And a lot of people say also that they can kind of see an improvement in the style. So yeah, I'm sure that's a factor as well.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the mailing list a couple of times. Can you say how many people are on that mailing list that you maintain for the books?
I don't have a really big mailing list. I mean, given some of the other people that, other authors I know, I think I've got about 15,000 people, maybe a little bit more than that, which is it's a pretty decent list, but I didn't really start collecting emails until late in the game. But, it's interesting. I think, I don't know what the average is, but a lot of it, I think, has to do with how emotionally involved with the story people are. I think I tend to, by the time they get to the end of the fourth book, I think they're pretty enamored with the whole idea, and obviously the characters and things like that. So I think it was after the third and fourth books, I think my emailing list started to increase because people just became so emotionally attached to the story and where it was going.
So people might have started out reading it, and then as they get more immersed in it, they might say, gee, now it's time to be on that email list because I'll be even more connected.
It's amazing when you mentioned earlier, Len, how much you like dolphins. It seems to be this kind of a universal connection, and it's weird. I hadn't expected this, but it seems like the idea taps into some instinctual the humans have for dolphins and vice versa. I'm not really sure what it is, but I've had people email me and just say, this has moved me in so many ways. I am just so in love with the ideas in the story. Because, I mean, when they talk to the dolphins, it's not just about what the dolphins say. It's about revealing so much more meaning and so many more connections and kind of the world around us. And I had this one gal recently, and she said that she started reading that. I almost cried when I read this email. I've gotten some really, really wonderful emails, and this one gal said that her mom was in hospice, and she spent a lot of time with her mom, and for some reason they started reading the book. I think she'd read it and really liked it, and so she started reading it to her mom. And her mom didn't even like being read to, but once she started reading it, she goes, "Oh, keep going." And they read all 4 books, and her mother was just absolutely stunned. But the sweetest part of the whole thing is she said, it was such an exciting idea, and it is such an exciting idea that clearly is coming, because at some point someone's going to figure this out.
Yeah.
But she said it gave me and my mom such an emotional connection right at the very end of her life. I mean, something that they shared and they were so excited about, and her mother was so excited about it. And it was just it was really an incredible email to get, and unfortunately, her mother passed away just about a week after that. And she said that lasting memory was something that she's really going to cherish. So sometimes, I mean, you really touch people in ways with your story that you never thought possible.
How do you explain the emotional side of waking up after 5 years and finding yourself in this situation?
It's one of those things. It sounds so trite, the old phrase, you got to pinch yourself. But it is amazing. It's hard to imagine. And it's almost, you can say it kind of feels like you're dreaming, but there's something called the Impostor Syndrome. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this.
I have. I'm a practicer of it.
Yeah, there you go. And that's kind of what it feels like, right? It's like I'm just kind of an average guy, and I have some ideas that I thought were really interesting, and I write those down, and I guess I write them in a way that are pretty captivating for people. So it's weird because I feel very average in terms of my experience and whatnot, but at the same time, it's it's like you get selected to ride in the first class cabin once, and you don't know why.
Yeah.
And so the whole time you're kind of looking around like, I don't belong here. I'm just I'm supposed to be back there. So it's a very strange and a very surreal feeling. And if anything that makes me feel grounded, it's actually hearing back from people, and hearing how much it. I mean, if anything makes me feel like, I've done something valuable, that's probably it.
Yeah, for sure. You have done everything through Kindle Direct Publishing and CreateSpace. What's been the kind of platform that you've used to put these books out into the world?
Yeah, it was Kindle. So when I started this, I mean, that was another part of the bucket list that was kind of the motivators. I had been reading about, the new platform on the Kindle that Amazon had released and how interesting it was, and I'd read about some other people that had done it. And I thought, well, that sounds like that would be pretty simple, because I'd been pretty familiar with the traditional route in terms of what it takes to be noticed by an agent or a publisher. as a newbie writer. In the old traditional route, I mean, it's very hard. I mean, you've got to be like a lottery winner. That's essentially what it boils down to. And you get shot down so much that it really, it doesn't just humble you; it depresses you.
Had you tried some of that that traditional route with some of your earlier writing?
I had done just a few. Just a few. I think when the book had come out, but I'd actually done. I had read books about people who had done it. I had friends who had done it. I had some short stories that I'd written with a friend, and we were going to try and do something like that. I think we had different contests and whatnot, and it just became very clear that this is a very difficult thing. And in fact, what's interesting that most people, probably almost nobody knows about the Breakthrough book, is that I had written it first as a screenplay.
Oh,
long before I wrote it as a book. It was probably several years before that, and in fact, I had gotten it optioned in Hollywood, but nothing ever came of it. But it was that kind of part of the process. The reason I had done that is because I knew how difficult it was to actually get a book published.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe as a screenplay, and then I went back and I turned it into a larger book, as I'd always wanted to. But by then, so the Kindle was out, and I put it on the Kindle. And it's such an easy process that anybody can do. It's amazing what Amazon has done in terms of opening doors for people that otherwise never would have been able to step through that. 'Cause, I mean, honestly, without Amazon and Kindle, no one ever would have read this book. I don't think it ever would have made it onto the desk of anybody.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, when you describe the different genres that you put together, it strikes me that the traditional publishing world is much more liable to pigeonhole a book and say, well, we've already had 2 dolphin books this month or something. And your ability to just let your book fill whatever interests or categories makes sense, that seems to be a benefit of this way of publishing.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Because, I mean, it's a very bureaucratic system, right? And so you have people that aren't writers, and what they need to do is they need to categorize, and they need to sort and organize, and, they've got a lot of books to deal with. And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right that they would put it into a specific category or classification.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it ever would have gone anywhere, even if it was accepted by somebody, which I think that alone would have been a long shot. So, yeah, I mean, without Amazon and Kindle. In fact, I'm still only on Kindle. I've got CreateSpace, so it's the paperback version of Amazon. But still doing self-publishing. I sell probably 95% of my books are all Kindle books. So
yeah.
I mean,
and you're on. I got it through Kindle Unlimited. So if somebody subscribes that way, and if somebody subscribes to your book that way, do you get the same amount of money as if they buy an ebook copy of it forever?
You don't. You get paid. You get paid a little bit less, but you do get paid. You get paid per page read.
I see.
Which if you in the old days, if somebody you could actually borrow the book, and you'd get a certain amount of money, and then they turned into the Kindle Unlimited, and then they would give you a certain amount of money if somebody downloaded your book. But then they actually found that a lot of people were kind of gaming that system.
Yeah. And
so they were doing whatever they could just to get people to download the book. And so Amazon changed, they've changed it a few times to make it fairer and fairer. And so now you get paid per page. So if you write an interesting book, you'll get paid better than an uninteresting book because people will therefore read more of it.
I see.
I do get paid, but I get paid a little bit more, I think, if people buy it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Mosaic, the book that it says on your website you're 90% finished. Maybe after today's work you're up to 91%. But when is that? When is that coming, and what's that going to be about?
I am way behind on Mosaic. It's funny. I've had so many people email me saying, "My God, when is the next book coming? I cannot stand it." I'm like, "I'm sorry. It's a big book. It's probably going to be over 600 pages.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very big story. It's taken me a long time." I'm behind schedule, but I'm hoping to have it done, at least the draft, done within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And part of it is already in editing, which is the good news. And so I'm hoping to actually have it online and available in the very beginning, or at least the first week or two of January. But there's been a big kind of a groundswell of impatience from people. So I'm really trying to get it out soon. But obviously you don't want to release something if you think it's not quite ready.
Yeah, that's one thing you might not have imagined when you're putting published author in your bucket list is fans turning into kind of terrorists on behalf of you finishing your book.
Yeah, that's funny. That is the last thing a new writer ever would have actually dreamed of, and it's a good and bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're having to try and respond to these people, but just the fact that they want to read your book, that's part of that whole imposter syndrome. And you're like, you know who I am, right? Like, I'm just a guy.
That's right.
I'm not that interesting.
I'm not waving a wand here.
Right. But it's so unbelievably gratifying that it's like anything that you do, right? Whether it's you make anything or any job that you do, it's just so gratifying when it is it's appreciated and valued. It just it's just nothing better.
Yeah. I have been speaking with Michael C. Grumley, author of the Breakthrough series. Thanks very much, Michael.
You're very welcome.
In content, I'll mention one list of books and one new podcast about books. This is a podcast that's been started by the Amazon Book Review team, and the publicity message I got about a week ago said that this is the Amazon Book Review podcast and that it features a spirited roundtable discussion on a book topic close to our editors' hearts, followed by an interview with a remarkable author. The John Carreyrou, father and son memoirists David Schiff and Nick Sheff, and Kristen Hanna are among the podcast's first guests, with more great authors to come. It says they're launching with 3 episodes: fall blockbuster books, great and not so great leaps from book to film, and books that made us laugh and cry. The Amazon Books editors will be releasing a new podcast every 2 weeks. I haven't had a chance to listen to an episode of this podcast yet, but I really like the idea of it. That books group used to be headed by Sarah Nelson, who's been on the show a couple of times, and I'm actually going to have the current senior editor for that group on the show next week, talking about their selections of the 100 best books so far in 2018, Chris Schloop. So this is it's kind of a dream job, except it's a lot of work because they plow through a lot of books, and they can recommend books that are published by anybody, not just Amazon Publishing. And the people that I've met on that team are pretty impressive. The idea of them having conversations about books every other week is very appealing, and I hope you'll check it out. I'll close with a couple of comments. Listener John Sullivan sent me a link to a company called CZUR. Not sure how to pronounce that, CZUR. This relates to the recent podcast where the guest built a scanner, and not sure if this is a similar and or better, but it's kind of a digital book thing, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. That was based on the interview I did with Dave Slusher. Also heard from Dan, who wrote, I meant to comment on the episode about the new Paperwhite. The added clips of you waking up and traveling to the announcement was a unique touch, and I found them enjoyable. I felt like I needed to chime in and agree with you about the sloppiness of formats and button layouts across Kindle and Amazon devices. When I highlight on my iPhone, I often think to myself it would be neat if I used the highlight colors for different types of highlights. But then when I'm on my Kindle Voyage, I'm reminded that would never work because there's no color menu on the Kindle device. Even though we cannot see color on e-ink, it's odd that we still cannot select a color by the word. Also, I agree to have uniform buttons on the devices is helpful for many reasons, such as when your mind is on another task or in low light settings. I think his answer was a bit silly. I'd have appreciated an honest, never realized that instead if that's the case. It doesn't make any sense that a phone or Kindle device can't have the same settings, and I find it hard to accept that buttons might not be able to be synced due to wiring layouts. Those are Amazon devices. Didn't they design those wiring layouts? I wonder if it's simply just an oversight on their part that he didn't want to admit. I understand there are many different teams, and the device team has little time to check with the app teams, etc., but I would think there would be some kind of a head team that would ensure the continuity and design over everything Kindle, Alexa, etc. I forget his name, but I think Apple has a manager overseeing this kind of thing. Hopefully they start to work together. Well said. I thought maybe I'd been a little too hard on those guys. After all, they had invited me to the project demo, but appreciate Dan weighing in on that topic as well. He concludes, thanks for all the great episodes and hard work. I'm glad to hear your mother is now home. Of course, we will offer our prayers for her continued improvement. And yes, Mom continues to recover from her hip surgery and settling into their new home It's a nice independent living community west of Boston, and a big transition still going well. That's it for this week. Next week's guest, as I said, will be Chris Sloop, Amazon's senior editor for books. After a long hiatus, I put up a recent episode of the Edge of the Road podcast. That's my other show that talks about our experiences with the Tesla Model 3. Thanks for listening.